Welcome to Mentoring Moments. Mentoring Moments is a sub-series of the E-commerce Edge podcast. It is composed of clips taken from Jason's one-to-one and group mentorship sessions. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the E-commerce Edge podcast. Now, before I welcome my fantastic guest, I've got a very interesting guest and topic lined up for you today, something that we have never covered before in 421 episodes of the podcast. So this is going to be a very fun one. But before I introduce my guest, I'd like to encourage you to go to your podcast engine of choice or YouTube and go ahead and follow or subscribe and share the link with your friends. We have a back catalog now of over 420 episodes of content, all related to e-commerce, omni-channel, digital retail, and everything in this sphere. So lots to catch up on. But I would love to welcome today to the podcast, Andrei MINCOV from Trademark Factory. Welcome, Andrei.
Thanks. Happy to be here and excited to have this conversation.
The great thing about the podcast is that I get to have people on who are experts in subjects that I am not. So at the same time, they're educating me. They're also educating my audience on topics that matter to them and matter to me, but that I can't speak competently to because it's an area I don't work in. And certainly when it comes to intellectual property protection, this is something that we see increasingly becoming important in the world of e-commerce, digital product design, product distribution, etc. And when we look at brands and products like Shein and Temu and everything else, we have this challenge, it seems, in the world where intellectual property is increasingly less and less respected and less protected. And I think this is an area that you absolutely specialize in. And one of the things, at least as I understand it, I'm sure you'll correct me if I'm wrong, is that if you do not enforce IP, if you do not enforce a trademark, then you can lose that trademark effectively. So you have to not only protect it, but you also have to aggressively pursue and enforce your intellectual property protections. Otherwise, you use it or lose it sort of thing. And this is something that I think is a big deal to lots of brands today.
There's some truth to that, but it's not as black and white as you made it out to be. Really, the idea behind this use it or lose it approach is that if you know that someone is infringing on your mark and you do nothing, then you may be considered by the court next time you go in and try and enforce something that you acquiesce, that you gave a license, that you are okay with other people knowingly infringing on your rights. And if you find yourself in that boat, then yes, that's a problem, right? But it does not mean that you are legally required to sue every single one out there who is barely coming close to the infringement. And if you don't do that, your brand is toast. That's not the case, right? So it's really a strategic decision. But basically, if you see that someone is infringing on your mark and you do nothing and you know about it and you continue to let them do it, yeah, there will come a time when the defendants in your next case will have a pretty good argument saying, look, these guys are letting this company to coexist under this brand. They're letting this company to do this. They're letting this company to do this. How are we any worse? Why can't we do the same thing? And the courts will have a problem not buying into that argument because every court, every litigation, every court case, it's really never about the law. It's always about the story. It's about which of the two stories the judge likes better. And then they find the law to justify why. And in intellectual property disputes, really, the two stories are always the same, right? It's the brand owner who's trying to say, hey, we are hardworking company. We've been building this brand for years. We've invested tremendous amount of resources to become this brand that everyone wants to copy. And we've been good guys. We're giving the world a great service or a great product. And these bad people, they stole our brand. They want to take a free ride on what we've built, and they should be punished. And there's, of course, the other side of the story where the defendant is going to say, we're just a small, tiny fish in the pond. We had no idea who these guys are. We came up with a completely different brand. It's not anything similar to what they did. And these guys are just trying to trap small businesses like me, entrepreneurs who are just trying to make a living. And then they're trying to trap us and then sue us because we have no resources to fight this, right? It's always the same story. And it boils down to which of the parties can make the story more believable. And it's really about that. And this is where advocacy comes into play. And this is where building your facts come into play, right? I don't do litigation, right? My firm, all we do is we do trademark registration, but I've done a lot of work with law firms. I've been part of law firms that do this all the time. Really, it boils down to you have to make the case, right? And if you're a brand owner, if all you do is you go and sue people right and left with no good reason, it gives them a pretty good argument that you're not really trying to protect your brand, that you're just being manipulative of the legal system because you have so much money, right? On the other hand, if you let everyone misuse your brand and you just pick that one, you have to have a very good explanation as to why. I'm sorry, it's a longer answer than you probably wanted.
No, I love the level of detail there. Now, one of the things that I think gets confusing for lay people such as myself is the different levels and tiers and types of intellectual property that are typically recognized internationally. The three main ones I think that most people, including myself, will have heard of: patents, copyright, and trademarks. So those are the big three guns,
Yep.
right? We have patents on unique designs, unique technology, etc. And there's probably a little bit of an overlap between patents, particularly in copyrights, in the sense that if you're copywriting some software code or something like that, there's probably an overlap between coverage of patents and copyrights, depending on what type of thing you're patenting or copyright, and then trademarks. Maybe step us through those three different types of intellectual property, where they intersect, where they overlap, and if it's important to have all three.
All right, I'll try to bring it down to 9-year-old.
Perfect for me.
The reason I'm mentioning 9-year-old, it's actually in my book, The Ultimate Insider's Guide to Intellectual Property. I had it proofread with my daughter, who was back then 9 years old, and I wanted to make sure that she could read it and understand it. You're right. The three types, the main three types. Let's start with copyrights. Copyright, and I assign one magic word to each type of IP for people to really understand, for the coin to drop. So the magic word for copyright is how, because the idea with copyright is it doesn't protect ideas, it doesn't protect concepts, it doesn't protect the substance, it protects how you express that idea, right? If you came up with a genius idea, hey, I'm going to write a book about intellectual property, you can't protect that with copyright. Or if you came up with a genius idea, hey, I'm going to write a song about how a boy met a girl and they fell in love. Again, that's not copyrightable, the idea behind it. The actual song or the actual book will be protected to the extent that the actual words, the sequence of sentences in the book, or the melody and the harmony in the song, or in the case of software, the actual code will be protected by copyright. But Microsoft Word had that, or Microsoft Office had that problem when Google decided to create Google Docs and Google Sheets, in that they didn't take Microsoft's code to create Google Docs or Google Sheets. They just built everything from scratch. So there was no copyright infringement in that because they didn't use the code. And Microsoft didn't have a patent that was active, at least at that time, for Microsoft to block Google or anyone else, to that matter, from creating another spreadsheet app or another word processing app, right? Copyright protects the code when we talk about copyright, because again, it's about how you express that idea that let's have a spreadsheet app. It's really all about that, how you express that. Now, patents, on the contrary, the magic word is what? Because that's as close as you're going to get. Patents are as close as you're going to get to protecting the underlying idea, because it protects the invention, right? The unique method, the unique product, how it's done. or what you sell. And if you have a patent on something, then you can stop anyone else from making or selling the same product in that same country. And there's actually method to this madness, because copyright is extremely broad. It's very easy to get. It lasts the whole life of the author plus 70 years in most countries after the author dies. But it's very easy to get, and it's very easy to get around as long as you're not really trying to copy, right? So it preserves the freedom for other people to create similar things because the protection is narrow. Now, with patents, the protection is extremely strong. It could be, but it's very short-lived. With patents, you get 20 years after the filing date, and it takes you about 5 years to get it. And it's also extremely expensive, and it's prohibitively expensive to protect the patent in more than one country. So for small guys, they may be able to get a patent in the US, patent in Canada, maybe. If we're talking about protecting your patent worldwide, yeah, good luck. You're well into six-figure territory. And the problem is with patents, once you file a patent in one country, you only have 6 months to file everywhere else. And if you don't, then your filing in your first country basically makes your invention unpatentable elsewhere, right? And that's basically why patents are so rare. And I always say, if you can protect your shit with anything other than a patent, don't get a patent.
Do it.
Yeah. So that's copyrights and patents. And the trademarks, it's really separate. The magic word is which, because with trademarks, the idea is protecting identity. How, like, the analogy I always give is, if you go to a store, like a supermarket, and you go to the shelf that sells toothpaste, it's the same glop in all of the tubes. The only way you pick one or the other is because of the name that you see on the packaging or the tube itself. And that's exactly the proper function of a trademark, is to allow consumers to tell one product apart from identical or similar products of everyone else. Ketchup is the same thing, right? And speaking of the power of the brand, right, when you go to that store and you pick the toothpaste, like 99% of people will refer to the toothpaste that they buy as my toothpaste. I want to get my toothpaste. Because once you get one, how often do you switch? Like, most people never.
Almost never.
And that's precisely the power of the brand, why it's so valuable for businesses to own that brand and be able to stop their competitors from getting something similar branded. And like you spoke about overlaps, there's an overlap between copyrights and trademarks, probably more than the overlap between patents. Copyrights and patents, in that when somebody designs a logo, it's a work of copyright, maybe. Not all of them. If you think of the logo for H&R Block, just the green square, it's not protectable by copyright because it's not original. There's nothing original around that. But it can be trademarked as a logo. But if you're talking about something that is original, that's actually a work of art, even if it's primitive work of art, there can be an overlap and there can be different owners in theory. So if you hire someone to design your logo, if you're not doing it yourself, you want to make sure that you have all the releases from the artist, that when you go out and trademark that brand and your brand becomes worth billions or millions, you don't get a demand letter from that artist saying, hey, I actually designed this. And I don't know if you've heard about it, but do you know how much Nike paid the designer to do the swoosh?
No idea.
$35.
Wow.
So the designer who designed the swoosh was paid $35 back in the day. And really, from the artistic perspective, maybe it wasn't much lower than it was worth. It became so valuable because it's now attached to the brand. And they've actually since given her a bonus just as a big thank you. They didn't have to. But the funny thing about Nike is the entire company was valued at $97 billion. The brand, just the brand itself, was 47 out of the 97. Not the sneakers, not the shirts, not the factories, not their trucks, just the name, the logo, and the tagline. More than half the company. It's pretty crazy if you think about it. But really, that's what allows them to take a white shirt that costs less than $1 to make, slap a swoosh in it, and have no problem selling it for 25, $50.
And this is a fantastic segue into kind of where my line of questioning was going to go. So let's take a Nike Air Jordan shoe.
Yep.
Okay. It wrapped up in this shoe are patents, trademarks, and copyrights all in the one single shoe. So we've got the Air sole, which is probably patented, like the Nike Air sole is probably a patentable technology.
Patentable,
right?
right?
Or what?
So
Sorry,
20 years have passed. Now I don't think unless they keep adding new technology to it,
tweaks to it, or something new design to it, something new. So they had a patent. Then we have the Nike swoosh. We have the Jumpman logo, which both the Nike swoosh and the Jumpman logo, at least to my naive mind and naive thinking, would be trademarks. And then we have copyright on any of the, for example, Just Do It. Is that a trademark?
Just Do It is also a trademark. Because you can't copyright short taglines. It's not original enough. And actually, you bring up a great point. A lot of people say, how can you trademark dictionary words? You can't own a word. No, you can, very much, like Apple. Like, you can't think of a more dictionary word than Apple. And it's a brand that's worth actually $300 billion. But going back to Nike and Just Do It, you couldn't copyright Just Do It because it's a common phrase, but you can easily trademark it because trademarks don't give you the monopoly over the phrase in vacuum, right? You don't own the word. You don't, like Apple doesn't own the word Apple, right? It doesn't mean that you can't go to
it's all contextual, right? It's in
the context of specific products and
software,
products and services that they registered their trademark for, right? And that's why it works, right? So again, there's method to the madness to different types of intellectual property, because again, with trademarks, you are given very strong protection over common phrases or images like the green square, but only in connection with very specific products and services. And if you try to go beyond, it becomes a problem, which in the world of e-commerce becomes a big problem, because the entire system of intellectual property was built long before there was e-commerce, right? Long before, like, it was built when it took a long time for the business to evolve, right? To evolve geographically and to evolve into different areas, right? Usually back in the day when they started this whole thing with intellectual property, someone was like, okay, let's start a business. Let's sell refrigerators. And they would be selling the refrigerators, and they'll be only selling them, I don't know, in Canada or US.
Or maybe in their state or in their city.
Yeah. And it was hard to copy them. And the idea that the same guys could suddenly start selling hair fans and vacuum cleaners and TVs was unthinkable, right? And now it happens every day, right? Somebody comes up with an idea, with a fad, let's sell this. They sell it for, let's go sell something completely different. And because of the way trademarks work, again, you have to claim the trademark rights over what you're trying to trademark in connection with those specific products and services.
Wow. So somebody like Whirlpool, for example, which I think they started out with fridges, and then they started making washing machines, and then they started making all sorts of whiteware and other appliances and blenders and all sorts of stuff. But when they first started out, I think there was maybe just fridges and washers when they first started making Whirlpool products. And so that trademark, that literal Whirlpool logo, in the world of trademarks, is it almost always in relation to a logo, or could it obviously Just Do It is a trademark as well, and it's just a series of words with a specific typeset in relation to sports wear and shoes. And so that would be, I don't know exactly what the trademark, like when you go to apply for a trademark, what is the level of detail you have to supply when you file for a trademark, so that they know, okay, which category of goods and services does this apply to? And then secondarily, a follow-up question to that, is that universal globally, that same classification system and all the detail you have to supply when you file for a trademark. Is this a globally accepted set of criteria to establish a trademark, or does every country have their own take on trademarks? And then what do we do with countries like China, for example, that don't seem to, on the surface of it, respect hardly any intellectual property apart from intellectual property that originates in China, and then they like to enforce it on the rest of the world?
So it's that's this meme about, I think, humans and pigs sharing like 95% of the DNA, right? Or something like that. I may be wrong in my numbers,
Yes.
but it's pretty close. So world trademark laws are about the same, right? There's a huge overlap, but there's some difference in details. And so there is this international treaty called Nice, based on the city in France, that created that classification of all goods and services into 45 classes, or the categories, they call them classes, right? And so that's uniform, kind of, but every country takes its own national stab at it. And within each class, there's a lot of subtlety. So that's that. Now, the question you asked before, you asked me 5 questions in your one question.
Yeah, sorry about that. I tend to do that.
I think the important thing is that everyone understands that big brands have more than one trademark. Apple has 1,300 trademarks in the US alone, same as Amazon.
Wow.
And Apple trademarks, obviously, their most valuable trademark is Apple as a word mark. No font, just Apple in capital letters in Times New Roman, right? Same that Amazon. Then they have names of their products, going back to Apple, right? iPhone, iPad. Then they have their services like iTunes and this or that. And Apple also trademarks their icons as logos because it wants to preserve the interface. And so Apple does all sorts of crazy stuff that most listeners of this podcast will never need to do, because really trademark is a function of 2 things. No, 3 things. 3 things. The first thing is really you seeing the value of your brand in the future. Not today, in the future. If you believe that you're building something that might become valuable, you are much better off protecting it today than trying to protect it when it's already too late and someone has stolen it. That's the first thing. The second thing is it's always a function of the budget. If you have an unlimited budget, and I've yet to meet a client with an unlimited budget, and I've done work for multi-billion-dollar companies when I was with Baker McKenzie as the biggest international law firm in the world, right? I've done work for Nike. I've done work for all sorts of companies. They still have budgets, right? Nobody has an unlimited budget. But if you have an unlimited budget, I have enough creativity to suggest that you trademark everything under the sun in every country in the world. And it's not going to hurt. It's just not the utility of that. It at some point becomes minimal. And the third factor.
And you still have to enforce it, right? Like the more trademarks you have, then it's not just this one-time filing fee and all this sort of stuff and registration. It's actually long-term enforcement of those trademarks as well.
Yeah. And the third factor is registrability. Not everything you want to trademark is, you may have come up with a name that's generic. You may have come up with a name that's merely descriptive and the trademarks office is going to throw it out. You may have come up with a brand that's too close to something that someone else had already trademarked. And it doesn't need to be identical, right? As long as it's similar enough, the trademarks office is going to send you home. And this is where a lot of people have misunderstanding. They're like, oh, you know what? Let's just misspell this. Let's replace the O's with zeros and I's with ones, or let's replace an S with a Z and we're good to go. That's not how trademarks work. And people get really upset when they realize that this strategy of misplacing a letter or 2 doesn't work. Not everything is trademarkable. And based on these 3 factors, if you understand how big this is going to be and what you're going to do with that, and you have some understanding of the budget, and the next thing you do is you check what's even trademarkable. Because there's no point, one of the things I always love to say, there's no reason in the world for you to spend $1 out of your pocket or a minute out of your life trying to build a brand that you cannot own. Because one of the 2 things are going to happen, and it's a lose-lose situation. It's either going to be a brand that nobody cares about, right? In which case you're wasting your life trying to, or it succeeds and only until you get a demand letter from someone else who now owns your brand. And it's going to be painful either way. And there's kind of two possibilities to that. One is it was registrable when you started out. You just didn't care enough to trademark it. And someone else jumped in and said, oh, that's a nice brand. They might become valuable. And they trademarked it, and then they sue you because now you're big and you have deep pockets. Or you may have chosen a brand that wasn't trademarkable from the start.
In
the first place. Exactly. And these guys, and just because they didn't sue you on the first day, they didn't know about you on your first day. They will find out about you when you become big enough for them to go after you. And so it's a lose-lose scenario. So the way I always recommend is there's a priority to this, right? The number one priority for every brand out there should be to trademark the name. Your logos are going to change. Your taglines are going to change. Your marketing is going to change. Your everything is going to change. The name is the last thing that's going to change. And you get the strongest protection with that. And if you cannot protect your main brand, you got a problem.
Your name brand, as people call it. That's why they call it a name brand.
Exactly. And you are better off to go back to the drawing board and come up with something else, right? Because again, with trademarks, with branding, really, it's less important to have the name. It's more important to own a name, right? It's because if you think you came up with the best brand in the world, it's like the most genius name, but you can't own it, who gives a damn?
And we look at names that were nothing until they were built into brands like Google. The name Google, who cares about like when they first started Google, who cares about the name Google? They gave it value over time. Because they trademarked the name Google, then they gave it value after they trademarked it, then that's fine. Now all of a sudden Google's worth $1 trillion, whatever the hell it is.
You're 100% right. And really it goes to every single brand out there that's actually worth anything. Nike, Apple, Amazon. Name one brand that's so valuable just because it's a cute name. It's not because of that.
They gave it value. They gave it value over time.
Exactly. And Alex Hormozi talks about it all the time. And really the value of the brand comes through two things. One is what you do with it, right? The value that you give to people and the value that people recognize that you can give to them, and also through your ownership of that brand. Because if you don't own it, there's no value. Nobody's going to, like, your investors are not going to pay you more for that brand. You can't license it. You can't franchise it. You can't really do much with it. You can't enforce it. And that's why trademarks matter. And businesses understand that, because in US alone, they file over 700,000 trademark applications every year. That's almost 2,000 trademarks every day, right? To give you context, while we're having this interview, there's like literally dozens of trademarks being filed. And if to your audience, if you're a business owner, you're sitting on there thinking, let me grow a little bit and wait, someone may be trademarking your brand right now.
Or it might already be trademarked.
It might already be trademarked. And the craziest thing about this is that the other thing that most people don't realize, it's a long process. It's not like you go get a domain name and $8 later and 3 minutes later, it's yours. With trademarks in the US, it's about 1.5 years. In Canada, it's close to 4 years.
From the moment you file.
So if you're like, I'm going to look for investors 6 months from now, you're 1 year too late. And that's the thing that most people don't realize, because there's a lot of misunderstanding and misconceptions around trademarks. Some people are scared that it's too complicated and it costs $1 billion to get. And so it's also only for the big guys, so they don't bother doing this. And the other half of the population, that's easy. I'm going to get it when I need it in 5 minutes, because there's so many ads out there. Trademark your brand in 5 minutes for $50. That's also not how things work. And when you really realize what the process is and how it works, it changes your strategy. And that's why I love doing these conversations so much, is because even talking to you, and you've done with brands, obviously, and I still see a lot of surprises to what I'm saying. And it's very telling.
And so let's take the Apple example, right? I think they've had something like 12 different, during the life of the company, they've had something like 12 different iterations on the actual Apple logo design itself, the actual apple. They've had the rainbow, they've had the blue and silver curve, they've had black, they've had white, they've had a bunch of different variations.
Each and every one was trademarked
on that
separately.
apple. And so what you're saying is they would go through the trademark process. They would wait until the trademark was granted and then deploy that new logo?
They would file a trademark, then deploy it, and then wait for it to get registered. Once it's in the system, if your attorneys did a good job doing the proper trademark search to see what's out there, you get a pretty good sense of certainty as to whether it's going to go through or not. And again, you want to pick a name, pick a brand that you're feeling pretty good about, right? And there are brands that are iffy that are worth filing sometimes, but if they're iffy, you want to be more reserved in your marketing. You want to, and if you're more certain than that, then yes, all you do is you file your trademark, then you announce, and then it gets registered in due course. We actually had a few videos on our YouTube channel where I speak about like big brands when they trademark their brands, right? Most of them trademark before launch or like right after they launch. And I'm gonna give you one of my favorite. I'm gonna give you two of my favorite examples. One is Bird, the scooter rental company. Yes. They became the fastest company to get to $1 billion valuation in, I think it was 2021 or 22. Can't remember exactly the years, but so here's the cool thing. They decided to start the company on September 1st. I don't remember the year. You can check it with Wikipedia. They filed their trademark on September 13th of that same year. That was before they had any freaking scooters. That was before they had any deals with the cities. That was before anything. But these guys realized that if this business is to be successful, we need to own the brand that we're going to slap on the scooters that are going to circulate in the cities using our app.
Just like Lime and all the other ones that came after them.
Because if we don't, if anyone can put Bird on their scooters, this model doesn't work. Like it can't work, right? So
and we have to be recognizable to the consumer as well.
So that was one of the first things they did. So they probably started the company and filed for the trademark. And then they started investing the money. They started bringing investors and telling them all the good things about what it's going to become. And the rest is history. And the other example is Coca-Cola. To bring you back many years ago, they filed their first trademark in 1892. This was the year when they were selling 9 drinks a day. I call it a lemonade stand with a dream. And I'm sure there were people out there saying, guys, this is just, why do you need a trademark? You just sell sugared water.
Sweet, dark sugar water.
And someone back in 1892 had enough foresight to say, this may be just sugared water, but the value will come from us owning the brand. And the brand is worth $80 billion, just the brand, right? Again, not their trucks, not their recipe, not their
bottling plants, right? None of that stuff.
And there's something to it because whatever they paid to their lawyers back in 1892 to file their trademark, right? Even if you take it for inflation, it still probably gave them the highest ROI out of anything else they spend their money on. And there's something to it. So they all do it. Like all the people you look up to, they all do it early.
Levi's, basically every household, the Bic pens, pretty much everything you look around you that's recognizable to you as the brands we know today that are instantly recognizable. Some of these brands are so iconic that they turn into the lingua franca of a product. For example, almost nobody says the word tissue. They use the word Kleenex, right? When your brand gets to a point where you are used to describe a product generically speaking, but that is your brand, when somebody says, give me a Kleenex, even if it's just a regular old tissue in a cardboard box, you've reached cult icon status, right?
It becomes a problem on the trademarking front because you can't enforce that anymore. Like, I'm going to give you a word, and I'm going to give you a few words, actually, and it's going to blow your mind. That it was once a trademark that someone owned. Linoleum.
Yeah.
Was a brand.
That was a trademark.
It was a brand. Now it's just a type of the product.
Lino. We just call it Lino.
Like it's escalator.
It is.
It used to be.
That was a trademark brand.
It was a trademark brand. And now, though Google was actually fighting in Supreme Court in the US, trying to prove that they are not generic yet. And all the people say, let me Google that for you, didn't come close enough to killing the brand. But eventually the brand will die. They call it genericide. But look, at that point, at that level, first of all, very few companies are ever going to get there. We're talking one in what, billions or millions, certainly millions of businesses that get to that level. It's a good problem to have for most businesses, right? Most businesses who are listening to you and I on this podcast, they're like, I wish I was a company that was making gazillions of dollars every year. And our biggest problem was, how do we preserve the brand that's worth several dozen $billion, right? It is a legal problem. It is a solvable problem. Most businesses can catch the problem before it becomes a problem. But again, for pretty much everyone on this show, I don't think it will ever be a problem. And it's not a bad thing. It's just the reality. Very few brands will get to that level. And so what you want to do is, before you start worrying about what you're going to do when your brand is $50 billion worth, first think you need a brand. You need to own your brand before it's worth something.
And this goes for, do you think that trademarks are relevant for service businesses just as much? For like, how important it feels like physical product based businesses and designs and styling of logos and all that sort of stuff, it feels like it's even Microsoft, obviously they produce software and they do produce some physical goods now, like the Surface, etc. And that's a trademarked term in its own right now. A trademark brand in its own right is Surface and Surface Pro, etc. If we looked at all the trademarks in the world today, do they mostly apply to companies that are selling physical products in the world?
I don't have that breakdown, but let me answer it in a slightly different way. Can you think of any successful business without thinking of its brand? Give me one.
No.
Because the brand is what we think about when we think of a successful business. Whether it's a service, whether it's a platform, whether it's SaaS or whatever the hell it is, we don't identify them. Hey, this is this company that has
this payroll software, or this accounting software. No, it's Xero, it's QuickBooks, it's whatever.
Right. And that's why it's so important for them to own it. And it's not different. And so going back to this idea that I threw in there about IP and trademarks in particular are not just for the big guys. It's the small guys that need trademarks the most, because big guys have the money to drown you with marketing,
in litigation,
with advertising, with litigation. They can survive without getting their brand trademarked, right? They got to that point because they built the brand value, right? And the only way a small guy, an entrepreneur in Ohio who started a business in his kitchen, can get anywhere on a playing field with the big guys is if they own IP. That's the only way, right? Sean Merriman, the football player, we actually have a pretty interesting interview with him. He trademarked Lights Out. And then he successfully went after Under Armour and Nike, who wanted to use his brand, right? He settled with both of them. But if he didn't trademark it, there wouldn't be a conversation. There wouldn't have been a conversation that he could start with Nike or Under Armour, right? And that's the same thing. You don't need to be a football star to get that, right?
Like the Hawk-Tua girl, right? I'm sure she's probably trademarked that term Hawk-Tua now.
I'm actually following somebody's Twitter account, and I think once the name appeared on everyone's radar, there was like 50 trademarks filed on the same day by different people who let's take advantage of this, right? And the people do that. Most of those trademarks are never going to get anywhere because there's no business behind them. But look, it's one thing to get your 15 seconds of fame and not get that trademarked. But it's completely different when you call yourself a business owner, you work on building something for months and for years, You bust your ass working, you build a team, you have all sorts of expenses on marketing, on advertising, and you're not protecting that which can become the most valuable thing in your business. To me, that's insane. And
so let's I mean, just take the poster behind you, Sylvester Stallone, right? He's affectionately known as Sly Stallone. Would he trademark the term Sly Stallone in relation to him and his personal brand?
Personal brands are different. I don't know if he trademarked that, right? He may have. I don't know. I didn't check, even though I'm a big fan. But in his personal capacity, like you don't need a trademark to protect you as a person. You need a trademark to protect your product and services. So let's say he was selling boxing gloves or whatever. And
there was Sly Stallone branded boxing gloves,
then you would trademark that. But if all he did was just acting, you don't need necessarily a trademark on your name for acting services. If you were to put together an acting school, then you would. Because again, you don't want someone else to start another Sly Stallone acting school, right? That teaches people how to get out of there.
Yeah, Adrian. Okay, and so in relation to e-commerce or new brands, new digital brands that are digital pure plays and they're selling a specific range of products, maybe they're even designing their own specific range of products, your advice to new brands, even if they don't know how big they're going to get, they maybe have ambitions to only be a local brand or whatever it might be, a boutique brand or whatever it is, your advice is still trademark your brand early, because you never know, it may explode into something big. It may explode into something you want to license. It may explode into something you want to franchise. You just never know how these businesses sometimes take on a life of their own. And so your advice would be, for most brands, trademark early and often would be your.
I'm going to give you a very simple 2-question test that anyone can use to know exactly how to deal with this. The first question you ask yourself, is it likely that I'm going to continue selling some products or services similar to the ones I'm doing now 2-3 years from now? If the answer is no, like I know for sure that it's a short stint, I am selling something, I'm making money, and I'm closing this off, you don't need a trademark. If it's really short-lived, don't bother, because you're not going to build enough brand value and you're not shooting for brand value. The brand is going to be gone 2-3 years from now. And yeah, this is not me looking down at businesses like this. There's nothing wrong with it as long as it's a strategy, right? If your answer is, ideally, if everything goes well, as I hope it will, I'll be around 2, 3, 5, 10 years from now, because it's going to be even easier for me to make more money when this goes well. Then the second question you ask yourself is, assuming all of this in the best case scenario, will the brand be making it easier for me to generate new leads, convert them into paying clients, get investor money, get better people working for me? Who do you think has more problem finding great developers to work for them? Google or a 3-person startup that nobody's ever heard of, right?
The startup that nobody's ever heard of.
It's part of the brand, right? It's part of the brand value that you can attract better talent for less money. It's part of the brand that you can get more leads for less money, right? When McDonald's opened in Moscow, Russia in 1992, they had 30,000 people on their first day lining up around the block, right? That's the power of the brand, right? Nobody tried it before. They were just there, right? And going back to McDonald's, like how much selling is required for them to convert people who walk in the door to paying? There's 100% conversion rate. All you need to do is say, do you need more fries with that? So the question you ask yourself, will the brand do any of this for me in the best case scenario 2-3 years from now? If the answer to that is no, then you don't need to trademark that. But what you do need is go back to the drawing board and come up with a brand that will. Because it's criminally stupid to spend 3 years and developing a brand that does nothing for you in the best case scenario.
So Trademark Factory is trademarked.
That was the first thing we did. We filed our trademarks in a bunch of different countries. Canada and US were the first ones, and we had this filed long before our website was ready. Because again, one part of it, of course, was education, right? We couldn't do trademarks without owning the trademark, but it also because I believe in this, right? And we've been in business under Trademark Factory brand for 11 years. And there's a reason that there's value to the brand. There's a reason that all of these efforts go into making the brand more valuable.
And you said, look, I have to eat my own dog food, so to speak. I can't be running a trademark business if I don't trademark my own bloody brand.
Exactly.
Wow. And what do you see if you were to look out the next 1, 2, 3 years? Do you see any major changes to international intellectual property law, rights, provisions, protections? We all know that there are countries that enforce this stronger than others. China's probably the worst offender in terms of, having said that, in Mexico, I can walk down any tienda street, any tianguis in Mexico, and I can see fake Nike bags. I can see fake everything, fake Rolexes, fake everything. So the reality is that this IP challenge, whether it be a patent, a trademark, a copyright, whatever it is, it's not universally enforced to the same degree in every country, every region, every city, every town. And do you see further harmonization or further bringing a united front to intellectual property protection? Do you see any changes on the horizon in this regard, or is it be the status quo for the foreseeable future?
So I say the changes will be there. I don't think there will be here 2, 3 years from now. I think really the future will be with almost private registries, something similar to what Amazon is doing with Amazon Brand Registry, where they have their internal rules for who can open a store and how you can enforce that stuff. Right now, Amazon Brand Registry is based on you having your trademark filed in one of the jurisdictions. And a lot of the clients who come to us to get their trademarks registered, they do it because once your trademark is filed, you can get a number for Amazon Brand Registry and get your brand enforced through there. But I think at some point in the future, people will realize how ineffective and inefficient the governments are in building this the trademark registries that are separate per country, that are really slow, that are unpredictable. Like Canada, like I said, 4 years. Business owners need to wait for 4 years before they hear back to find out whether their brand is registered. That's insane in today's world. And I think at some point, and governments, unfortunately, are notoriously unwilling to give up their monopoly on power. So I think their systems are going to stay, but there will be some parallel platforms or systems that more and more people are going to, or more and more businesses are going to lean over to protect their brands. I don't think it's going to be, I don't think it's a matter of 2 or 3 years, but I think 10 to 15, we're probably going to see a big change because everything is going global, everything is going digital, and the level of protection or the approach to protection, as smart as it was 50 years ago, is just not really working now.
And do you see blockchain playing a part in this?
It could be. Blockchain is just a technology on how, look, trademarks is not about who came up with the name first, right? So it's not about documenting the first use. It's about documenting the first claim of the right as a right. So it has to be recognizable by someone else. So whether you do it through blockchain or through something else, it's more of a technical solution that by itself doesn't address the problem, right?
And how much does it cost today if I want to file a global trademark today in almost every major, because you said basically if I only file it in one country, what's the point? I really need to do an international trademark.
So here's our 4 rules of thumb on this. First is you always start with your home country, right? When I say home country, where the business is based, right? You always start there. That's
wherever it pays taxes.
Yes. Second layer is you look at countries that make you money, where the brand makes you money. My magic number for this is if you make over 30K a year in that country, get a trademark in that country. If you make less than 30K or plan to make less than 30K, if all goes well, probably don't. It's not that important. Third layer is where you have a lot of expenses. So if you have an office there, or if you target your ads to that country, if you invest in that country, get a brand trademark there. That's the third layer. And the fourth one is optional. If you make physical products and if you manufacture them overseas, get a brand trademark there. We have a story, not a story, we have a case. There's a American e-bike company. They found a factory in China to make their e-bikes. They placed an order, paid a crap ton of money to make those e-bikes. The Chinese factory made the e-bikes. They put them in containers. They put those containers on the ship. Just as the ship was about to leave China to go to North America to sell the bikes, the captain of the ship got a demand letter from a Chinese company that trademarked the same brand. And the captain of the ship said, now what? So the captain of the ship unloaded all those containers back to the dock, informed the factory, and the factory said, we have no idea. And so the factory reached out to the e-bike company and said, we have a problem, right? All your bikes, they're in containers, but they're arrested because someone else owns that brand. And exporting products marked with a brand that is owned by someone else is considered trademark infringement, the act of exporting out of the country. And
it's not just domestic, it's international trademark infringement.
No, it's an infringement of the Chinese trademark to export your product out of China, right? No matter where. And the problem with that is that the guy who owns the e-bike company is now out of money and he's out of the bikes. And he's sitting there and with an impossible dilemma, really. Do I pay off the Chinese company that owned the brand so that they release my bikes?
Or do I rebrand the whole thing?
Or do I rebrand the whole thing? And there's no good solution. The only good solution out of that situation is for them to buy a time machine
and go back and trademark it.
And I find humor in this, but can you imagine the amount of pain this causes and the amount of stress? And really, the only way to deal with that is if you're ever thinking of making physical products overseas, even if you're not planning to sell them there, make sure you trademark it, because otherwise, the bigger your brand gets, the more problems it's going to cause. But this doesn't mean that you have to trademark your brand everywhere, right? There will be countries that have no real market for you, right? And if you're at that stage where you're selling millions and millions of dollars in every single country, again, you're probably not listening to this podcast. You probably have an army of lawyers working for you already. And this is not dissing your audience. This is just the reality, right? So if you're starting out, again, don't get scared that, hey, I can't afford to trademark my brand in Zimbabwe. Who gives a shit? Trademark your brand where you are. Trademark your brand in 2 or 3 countries. You can file a single trademark that's going to cover the entire European Union, 27 countries, one application, right? Do that, do US, do Canada, maybe do UK, maybe do Australia.
And how much roughly would that cost to cover the whole European Union? Roughly, if we went through you and I came to you and I said, look, I've got this new brand. I think it's going to go gangbusters. I want to file this trademark.
Yeah, so I don't want to.
It depends.
No, not really. So we have a bunch of packages. The one that everyone goes for is the one that we're really known for. Is the guaranteed package that gives you everything from start to finish, with unlimited responses to what the government is going to throw at us in the middle, with 100% money back guarantee if it doesn't go through. So that you're going to pay for roughly $2,500 to $3,000, depending on the jurisdiction, plus the government fees. If you're in the business of building your brand, it's a good investment, right?
It's a nominal.
If you're in the business of gambling with your brand, there are cheaper solutions out there that's probably going to cost you more.
In the long run, yeah, fantastic. Andrei, this has been a fantastic conversation. I have learned so much. I was literally, apart from understanding some very basic things about intellectual property protections that I've read online and various other places, and way back in the day, years and years ago when I was a young kid, my dad tried to file a patent application for something he was designing. And so we went through that process online and a few different things, but I certainly am not the expert in this area. You are, and I really appreciate your knowledge and sharing it with me and my audience today. So the takeaway from this is that I took away from this is, if you think that you are going to be doing a similar thing in 2 to 5 years' time. You're going to be making money off this brand. You're going to continue to pour effort into a brand. You're going to continue to build the brand and build value in the brand. And the goal is to turn it into something that has long-term value. You should probably think about trademarking your brand ASAP, basically. So that's my key takeaway. I really appreciate this. Now, as we come down to the end of this is where I get to flip the script. I get to turn the microphone over to you. I get to let you ask me one question. Any question you like, could be personal or professional. Mr. Andrei MINCOV from Trademark Factory, what is your question for me today?
My question for you. Before I do that, I actually would like to repeat what you said with a tagline of ours that we've, of course, trademarked. If it's worth promoting, it's worth protecting. Right? If you're pouring any money into promoting your brand, own it. As for the question that I have for you, that's unexpected. I like that. That's what makes the conversation great. I'm going to ask you this. How do you, because you've spoken to thousands and thousands of business owners out there. You've seen thousands and thousands of business owners out there who do smart things, who do stupid things. What's your number one way of predicting which of them is going to make it and which of them is not?
Fabulous question. I think for me, every single company, brand, individual that I've ever worked with that has made it, the single thing that they have in common is grit, meaning that they refuse. It doesn't matter how hard it is, doesn't matter whether they go bankrupt, whether they nearly go bankrupt, whether they have to start again, whether they have to move to another country and start again, whether they have to rebrand and start again, whether they have to find a new business partner and start again, whatever it is, whatever trial or tribulation comes their way, the only thing that has stood out to me that is absolutely crystal clear and unequivocal is they just never stop. It just does not, they just never give in. And I look at me and I look at my personal brand and I look at even my podcast or anything else. And the reality is you never lose if you never stop. That's the whole key thing of it, right? I've got over 400 podcast episodes, but I'm not Joe Rogan. And I'll probably never be Joe Rogan in terms of size, scale, reach, brand, all that sort of stuff. But it's not going to stop me from trying. And it's not going to stop me from continuing to go on. And I think that really there's a fine line between persistence, obstinance, stubbornness. These are all fine lines, but I think you've got to have a really big blend of all of these things and maybe even be slightly delusional at some point in your journey to think that you either deserve success or you're willing to earn success by hook or by crook, whatever you have to do to find success for you. And then I would have a slight caveat to this, which is that all the people that I have come into contact with that have been wildly successful, they define success for them in a unique way, meaning that they don't necessarily say, look, I need to be making $1 million a year and that's what I'll consider successful. No, they define for them what success looks like for them in a unique context. And by that, so for me, okay, great. It would be fantastic to have 1 million listens per podcast episode. But for me, my primary goal in starting a business or starting my business has always been in service of freedom for me. So how can I have location freedom? How can I have financial freedom? How can I not be canceled, for example, for my views or for my opinions? How can I get to a place of enough personal freedom in my life that I can live exactly the way that I want to live and not get canceled or fired, or just freedom in many personal freedom aspects as I can manage? How can I achieve that? And where do I need to live to achieve that? What kind of business do I need to create to achieve that? Whilst also leveraging my skills and experience to get. And so that's the lens that's how I frame success for me, is financial freedom, location freedom, cultural freedom, just freedom in general. How can I achieve as much personal freedom in my life as I possibly can? And that's what success looks like to me. And that's how I've engineered my life. And so for me, by defining what success is for me and not looking at it through maybe the typical lens of saying, well, you're not a millionaire, you're not successful. But I think we have to define success for ourselves and not let the world define that for us. I've never been the kind, I didn't get married until I was well into my 40s. I don't have kids or want kids, and neither does my wife. I grew up in the United States, where most Americans are so patriotic they can't imagine living outside their hometown, let alone living outside the United States or becoming a citizen of another country. I did that. I moved to New Zealand, became a citizen of New Zealand, lived there for almost 30 years. My wife's a Kiwi. I then moved to Mexico, which everybody says, oh, you're going to die. You're going to go to Mexico. You're going to move to Mexico and you're going to get murdered. So I guess I've been a contrarian, and my parents raised me to be a contrarian ever since I was a little kid. They raised me to be extremely independent. And I think at some points they probably regretted that encouragement, because I was an obstinate little child that kind of did my own thing always. But they raised me to have independent thought and have independent goals and to pursue those goals with vigor and grit. And those are the things that I identify in other people that I surround myself with that are successful. It's because they've defined success for themselves and they just never give up until they achieve it.
That's a beautiful answer. Thank you so much. Loved it.
If you'd like to get mentored by Jason for free, head over to greenwoodconsulting.net, scroll to the bottom of the page, and click Get Mentored by Jason.